Okay, we are Mem Aleph and Aleph 41a. We are middle of describing the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and the procedure of his Torah reading in the Yom Kippur service. After a very busy day of running around, doing all the services in the temple, and Yom Kippur, mikvah, offerings, incense, holy holies, raffle, sending a goat off to Azazel mountain, all kinds of things, menorah. He then reads the Torah with great pageantry, as we described. The Torah is passed from one person to the next, in ascending order of the hierarchy of temple administration, until finally it makes it to the high priest and he reads. And yesterday we discussed how he reads 3 sections from the Torah, 2 directly from the Torah, 1 by heart. The 2 he reads from the Torah itself are close to each other. They're both in the book of Bamidbar, Acharimois, and then Achba are 2 sections of the Torah describe the Yom Kippur service. And we described yesterday, sorry?
No, it's okay. I'm just remembering as
yeah. And he described yesterday how because they're so close in space, therefore he can skip because it's the same message. And the amount of time it takes for the person to roll the Torah to the next spot won't delay the community too much or at all, because it's being done while the translator is translating the last verse of what he said, because of how close it is. But then the
same topic.
A, it's the same topic. B, no wasting time with the community. Right. That's right. The rolling. That's right. The rolling is during the time while the translator is still translating, so it doesn't waste any time with the community. Now the next section is the Gemara now is going to discuss the next reading, the next part after he's done reading the 2 sections from the Torah itself. The 3rd section, which he reads by heart. So the Gemara begins by quoting the Mishnah. The Goylo Torah. He closes the Torah. Umanicha b'cheikoi, and he puts it into his bosom. He holds it in his chest. Chulu, etc. The Mishnah goes on to say that when he's holding the Torah, he announces and says, more than what's written here, more than what I read to you is written here. And then proceeds to recite by heart the section in Vayikra that describes Yom Kippur. But he does so by heart, not reading from the text of the Torah itself. So we already understand. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. So first of all, the Gemara discusses Kol Kach Lama. Why does it have to say this? Why can't you just read the next section that describes Yom Kippur? Why does it make this announcement? More than what I read is written here. Why make that announcement? Just recite the relevant section of the Torah. Why does it have to make this announcement that I just read to you 2 portions? But more than what's written here, more than what I said is written here. And then recite by heart. Says the Gemara, and this is to your point you were talking about yesterday, the respect of the Torah. Says the Gemara, not to give a bad rep to the Torah. Because if he doesn't get this intro and he reads it by heart, people might think that the reason why he stopped reading from the Torah is because he found a mistake in the Torah. Because he found a mistake in the Torah. Because he found a mistake in the Torah. And it's invalid. So he's got to read it by heart. That's what people might think. So therefore he announces by saying, I just read to you about Yom Kippur. There's much more in here about Yom Kippur, which is what I'm presently about to tell you. So he does so to say that what I'm telling you now is not here or any problem. It's in this book. I'm just not reading it from this book. But it's all here. It's that way he defends the honor of the Torah. No one should think that he's stopping to read from it and reciting by heart because there's some problem with the Torah that he just discovered.
You mean like a letter is off?
A letter is off or something's missing. Yeah.
But he's reading directly by memorization.
He's reciting verbatim the words of the Torah. That's why he has to read all the sections in the Torah that describe Yom Kippur. 2 are close to each other, so he can do so from the Torah and roll without wasting the community's time. All right. The 3rd one, as we're about to describe, is too far away. It's going to take too much time.
I'm talking about scroll
Okay.
here, that you need to start.
Yeah, we're talking about scroll like we have downstairs.
Uh,
So as we're about to describe, he cannot scroll all the way to
Second Torah.
the, okay, so the Gemara discuss why it doesn't have a second Torah. We'll discuss that in a minute. Right? So we're going to discuss all that in a minute, why it doesn't fit. But before he recites by heart that third section, he has to tell people the reason I'm reciting it by heart is not because there's anything wrong with this book, which is why he begins by saying, there's more about Yom Kippur in this book, namely what he's about to say. And then he says it. Now to your point. The Mishnah said that after he rolls the Torah, holds it in his chest, and announces more than what I just read to you is written here, he then recites by heart the section that describes Yom Kippur in the book of Pekudim, the book of Bamidbar. I said before, Bamidbar he reads, and Vayikra by heart is the reverse. Vayikra is where he reads, Bamidbar is by heart.
Now he reads from Bamidbar.
By heart, yeah, it's the reverse. I'm sorry. Achar Moises is in Vayikra, and then this section is in Bamidbar, the book of Bamidbar. So the Gemara asks, first of all, the lichreche, the sefer v'likre, roll the Torah out. Lichre means like to wrap, to roll. Roll the Torah, roll the book, v'likre, and read. Why does it recite it by heart? So we already know the answer to this. Right? We already know the answer to this. But the Gemara spells it out. Sorry. Time frame. Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Sheshes, Rav Huna son of Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Sheshes, the fee because she'ain goyel in Sefer Torah, we do not spend our time rolling out the Torah. It's tzibur in public. It's not respectful of the community's time. Halacha places great emphasis on the respect of people's time. We had this before. Not about time, but about
What's the word before tzibur?
Sefer Torah.
Oh, Sefer Torah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Why is it contracted? Just because? Okay.
typeset. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, it's also good that you pointed out that it's Bamidbar because you mentioned yesterday that you have to go forward in reading.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
That's a good point. Yes, that's a very good point. You know, that's probably why it's that order. Good point. We had this idea of respecting for the community earlier with respect to the Koyanim. Gemara commented that a person should take the community's respect very seriously because the Koyanim stand with their back to the ark and face the people. It's a very similar thing here. You know, the time of the community is of great importance. And that's a big part, if not the main part in some ways, of the Gabai's job is to make sure that before the Torah is taken out, before Torah reading, the Torah is set to its correct place. So that never have to spend any time in the presence of the community rolling out the Torah. It's not respectful to the community's time, and it's not respectful for the Torah either. You know, it's like the Torah is exposed in public, you know, doing its private business, rolling out, while everybody's just standing around waiting. Both ways, it's not respectful, not for the Torah, not for the community.
It's like the car is naked in a sense.
Yeah. So unless it's correct, absolutely. Absolutely. So the Gemara asks, as Fishel just asked, the Lacy Sefer Torah Achrina, and let them bring another Sefer Torah, V'likre, and read from it. Bring 2 Torahs. Yeah, have it prepared. Have it prepared, 1 or 2 Torahs. As we do every Shabbos and Shul. Every time there's 2 Torahs in Shul, we do that. So Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar, Rav Huna, son of Yehuda, said, Mishum, because of Pogmoy Shadrishay, because of the suspicion that people will assume that there's something invalid about the first Torah. And if we had 2 Torahs, people assume the reason why you putting away one and taking away the other is because the other Torah is invalid. No, what should your question be? We do it all the time, right? Mars is going to address that momentarily.
I was thinking that perhaps maybe there was only one because, oh no, actually I was thinking of the king. The king had his own personal.
But this isn't the Torah he uses. And it's not the king, it's the high priest. The king will get to it, the Hakel discussion. Okay, so that was reason number 1, so as not to give the Torah a bad rep, of people thinking that the reason why he's taking the second Torah is because he found a problem with the first one. So that's Rav Huna's reason. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish suggests another reason. Lefi, because she'ein mavarchim, we don't make a blessing. Ein mavarchim bracha, we don't make a blessing. She'ein atzricha, that isn't needed. Every time you open a new Torah to read from it, someone has to make a blessing. Now here, only the high priest is reading. Now, because he's the only one reading, really should only be one time and he makes all the blessings necessary, which was 8 total. Right? There's 8 blessings he makes. Mm-hmm. So he should only be making that once. But then if he takes out a second Torah, he's gonna have to do it again. That would be forcing us in a position to make an extra blessing when unnecessary. The reason why we don't make blessings when it's sort of counterintuitive. One might have the thought that, what do you mean, don't make blessings that aren't needed? Don't we always want to be making more and more blessings? Now, while that's true, but you have a biblical issue of God's name in vain. So we try to, even though we want to find as many opportunities as we can to thank Hashem, but you want every opportunity that we thank Hashem to be a significant enough reason to do so, not to take it lightly. So there's a balance to be struck between thanking God at every turn versus taking God's name lightly. And this balance of values puts halacha in many mental gymnastics to discuss when exactly and how exactly you're required to make a bracha. You took an extra piece of food. Is it covered by your first bracha? Not covered by your first bracha. And if it's not covered, then you have to make a bracha. If it isn't covered, don't you dare make a bracha, because then it's a wasted bracha. There's constantly discussions like this. And if we can find a manner in which you make less brachas, in some ways is better, because you avoid saying God's name in vain. Classic example of this is the different views on the tefillin brachas. Right. So in Chabad, we specifically only make one bracha, and we don't talk between the hand and the head bracha, that the bracha extends, and we don't have to force, because if we talk in between, we're forcing ourselves to make another bracha. We shouldn't do that. Whereas other communities, they have to make 2 brachas because it's 2 different mitzvahs, and then they say a Baruch Shem just in case the second bracha was invalid, right? So they also do that, right? They make a special apology reading just in case the second bracha was invalid, whereas we to begin with don't say it. So these balance of principles between thanking God at a return versus not using God's name in vain is a balance that halacha is content with all the time.
It's one of my daily morning mysteries to me, how you would think that you would make the bracha on the first tzitzit pair that you put on and think about extending that, like having lunch here.
You're talking about the small tzitzis versus the big tzitzis? Yeah, so the reason is because the mitzvah of tzitzis on its more perfect form is to be wrapped in the tzitzis rather than wearing the tzitzis. Mm-hmm. Even though one is obligated in wrapping, even though one is obligated in the wearing, but the wrapping is, I even seen sources that if you're putting on small pair of tzitzis, not the right system siddur, but how to put on the small pair of tzitzis in such a way that during the bracha you're wrapping also. The end is we don't do it because we anyways wear big talis. Right? But if you didn't have a big talus available, there is a method in which you can use a small tzitzis and have yourself wrapped. So you make the special wrapping bracha, which is why we delay it to the wrapping bracha, because there's different brachas. Mitzvah tzitzis versus lisatev tzitzis. And the wrapping is a higher mitzvah, which is why we do it that way. Anyway, okay, so we have 2 reasons for why we don't take out a second Torah. Number 1, no one should assume that there's a problem with the first Torah. And number 2, we want to avoid necessitating that the high priest make all the 8 brachas a second time. The Gemara challenge. Sorry.
Opinion for the second.
Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. The Gemara challenges the first position, which we noted the question earlier. The first position was that the reason why we don't take out a second Torah for the high priest to read is so that no one would assume that there's a mistake with the first one. And the Gemara asks, are we concerned with the issue of people assuming the first Torah is problematic? That would imply we never take out a second Torah. And that's just not true. We take out second Torahs all the time. Right? Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka states, and this is the halacha, Rosh Chodesh Tevis, Shecholis b'Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh Tevis that falls on Shabbos. Right, so Rosh Chodesh Tevis is on Hanukkah. Hanukkah is 8 days, starting the 25th of Kislev. So Rosh Chodesh Tevis is going to be on Hanukkah. So you already have Hanukkah that necessitates Torah reading. Now you have Rosh Chodesh that necessitates Torah reading, and now at Shabbos you have the Torah portion. Right? So it says Yitzchak Nafka, maybe one brings Shalosh Torahs, 3 Torahs. The Torah Achas, and with one Torah, you read Minyanei Shal Yom, you read the Parsha of the week. The Achas, and one Rosh Chodesh, you read the section relevant for Rosh Chodesh. The Achas, and the third Torah, you read B'Shal Chanukah, the sections relevant of Chanukah, which is the inauguration of the temple. So this seems to contradict the principle, Rav Huna's principle. Rav Huna is saying the reason why we don't. Let's rephrase it. Reish Lakish, who said the reason why we don't take out a second Torah is not to necessitate extra blessings. That isn't the question. Because when it comes to the 3 Torahs on Rosh Chodesh, it's 3 different people reading, actually, even more than 3. And we're not forcing ourselves to necessitate an extra blessing. You anyways have more people getting called up, so you're anyways having more blessings. So why not take out more Torahs? It's not like you're forcing extra blessings. They're happening anyway.
That works.
So that works. But in Kippur, where it's one person reading, don't necessitate extra blessings by taking out a second Torah. Got it. But if the reason why we're not taking out the second Torah on Yom Kippur is because we don't want anybody to think the first one is a mistake, then we should that should be a principle that applies across the board, and we should never take out more than one Torah, including Rosh Chodesh. So the Gemara answers, and read the answer and translate it. But to be honest, I'm not fully certain I understand it correctly. I'm not fully certain I understand it. I'm just going to tell you what it says, and then you'll tell me what you think. Gemara answers. Talasa Gavri, when 3 different people, but Talasa Sifri, are reading from 3 different Torahs, Leka Pagama. There's no issue of assuming that there's a mistake in the Torah. Right? Because it's 3 different people and 3 different Torahs, and each person is getting their own Torah. Achayit Gavra, one person, the Sifri, reading from 2 Torahs, then there's the issue of maybe there's a mistake. Now, I'll tell you where my trouble is. It would seem to me that this answer works specifically in the Talmudic era, when you had where each person read, whoever got the Aliyah read. Today, the person getting the Aliyah makes a bracha, and someone else reads. But that person reading is really reading on our behalf because we don't want to embarrass people who don't know how to read. Right? But back in the Talmudic era, the person who got the Aliyah, they read. And that makes sense. If one person is reading, well, what's the logic here? This is what I understand the logic is. One person's reading, and all of a sudden he switches Torah. Why switching Torahs? Oh, you must have found a mistake in the first one. But in the case of 3 different people from 3 Torahs, guy number 2, why is he reading from Torah number 2? Because he found a mistake in the first one? He wasn't by the first one. Right? Because he's reading a second one. But today you have one person reading all of them. You said
as agents for the one.
Right. So that's why I'm saying that's my trouble is. The Gemara's answer seems to only apply when you have 3 different people reading, not when you have 3 different people making brachas. We have one person reading and 3 different people making brachas. Okay, so we have to say that because he's reading on the other guy's behalf, there's no issue of maybe making a mistake because it's that person's reading, not his reading. But at the end of the day, the logic that the Kohen is switching the Torah, the Kohen is not switching the Torah because we don't want people to think that the Kohen found a mistake. I don't know, maybe Meir Chaykin found the mistake and that's why he's switching the Torahs. Because he's doing the same reading for all 3. Right? So it seems to me that the logic that the Gemara is giving seems to more perfectly apply in Talmudic era where each person actually read from a different Torah. Right? Yeah. I guess nowadays, fast forward hundreds of years, everybody knows we're doing this. But no one's worried about anything. But I'm just going through the Gemara's logic. People don't assume we make a mistake. This is part of the protocol. You take out 3 Torahs because there's 3 different readings. Okay, everybody knows that already. It's become part of the system. So no one's actually having the thought that maybe exactly. No one's actually having the thought that there might have been a mistake. I'm just taking the Gemara's specific logic, and it would seem to me that the Gemara's logic is designed more aptly for a time when each person getting the Aliyah actually read from a different Torah.
In gathering people going to see the chairman of the board right? And you would figure that a certain amount of preparation was done to inspect
Yeah.
Torah's quality before, I mean, not the.
This is not the average reading. This is the high priest on Yom Kippur. Yeah, you're right. So there's a higher standard, more scrutiny. So you can expect more, right. I can accept that, but the Gemara doesn't say it. The Gemara doesn't say the high priest on Yom Kippur is under more scrutiny. The Gemara could have said that, but doesn't.
Maybe it's because the people who are going to gather there are lay people mostly, and they may make their own assumptions, but nevertheless, it's assumption that.
That's another answer, but also the Gemara doesn't give that answer.
No.
Yeah, these are all fair, but the Gemara doesn't say it.
But I think it's all a function of like top down in this case, in which you have, like I said, chairman of the board is, the board meeting, and he doesn't go in and unprepared.
Yeah.
Goodness,
Yeah.
how much care does he take of
There's
himself
certainly lots
on
of,
the day?
to add to your point, there's so much scrutiny for the behavior of the priests in the temple that there's even that story of the guy who got stoned by the Esrogim. No, right? The Nisuch HaMayim, when they pour water on sukkahs instead of the libation in addition to the wine, it doesn't explicitly state it in the Torah. It's by derivation of the sages.
Right,
so it's by tradition. So that's right. So if someone was a heretic in the sense that they didn't believe in the oral tradition, they wouldn't have poured the water, but they want people to think that they're pouring the water. So they pour it on the side, not pour it in. Which is why they instituted a rule that the high priest, when he's pouring the water, he's got to raise up his robe, so people should see clearly that he's pouring the water into the hole. Because when one time he didn't, this guy's a heretic. There's a priest heretic not doing the law. So they started throwing esrogim at him, pelted him with esrogim. So I'm just adding to your point that there's certainly a high level of scrutiny.
Yeah.
Sorry?
He smelled good on the way out.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right, you can compare it even to 770. I mean, there are diaries with full details of everything they ever did. And oftentimes discussions amongst Chassidim of what halacha they was relying on when he did this, and what halacha was he relying on when he did that. So there's definitely a high level of scrutiny. But again, the Gemara doesn't give that answer as much as sound logic.
I mean, there wouldn't be a mistake in this Torah scroll at 770 on Yom Kippur, and I guess I'm going back.
There could be, but you hope not.
It could be, yeah. Well, I mean, if there was no preparation done, then it could be. But if it was prepared, it still could be. But the odds are low. Anyway, it doesn't discuss it, and I think that in and of itself is a good thing to ponder. Like, it's not mentioned.
That's awesome.
How much stronger are the other?
So if the Gemara doesn't, that's right. So if the Gemara doesn't mention that as an answer, it means that it means the Gemara assumes that this is a better answer, which itself requires study.
Right.
Very oftentimes the commentaries will do that.
Sure.
Why did the Gemara answer this way? Well, it must be this problem, must be that problem. Anyway. Okay, let's conclude till the Mishnah so that when we can start the discussion on Hakel at least before Sukkot. Because Hakel is really on Sukkot. Okay, so the Mishnah continued. When he's done the reading, he then recites 8 brachas. So most of the 8 were pretty self-explanatory, with the exception of 1. Now here the Gemara introduces a Mishnaic text which elaborates on the Mishnah describing those 8 blessings, which will basically be a review for us. Tanan Rabbanan, our sages taught, Mevarchin, the high priest makes the blessing. Ala Torah, he makes a blessing over the Torah. Just as we make a bracha in Shul, the giver of Torah, it's a blessing on Torah reading. He does that. Then, Yala Avada, he makes a blessing over the service that he finished performing. He just finished the whole day of service in the temple. And then he makes a blessing of thanks, which Rashi told us in the Mishnah is Moedim. Sorry, the blessing of Avodah, which is a blessing of the service, is the bracha Retzei. Right? The translation of Retzei is Retzei Hashem Elokeinu. God should look favorably upon our service. So he reads that because he just finished the whole day of service. Then Alayda, he makes a blessing of thanks. That's Moedim. Then we have Machilas Avan. He makes a blessing over the notion of God forgiving our sin, which we do on Yom Kippur. We said we actually have that blessing in our Shemona Esrei. Katikin ala mikdash b'fnei atzmai, val hakoyin b'fnei atzman, and al Yisrael b'fnei atzman, val Yerushalayim b'fnei atzman. And then they established that he should make a blessing over the temple, its own blessing, for the koyanim, its own blessing, for the people Israel, its own blessing, and then for the city of Jerusalem, its own blessing. That's a total of, how many is that? It's 7, right? Torah, service, thanks, forgiveness, temple, koyanim, Israel, and Jerusalem. That's already 8. So then that would be, how is the Mishnah different? The Mishnah said something else. The Mishnah said a total of 8, but here the Gemara seems to be implying 9. Let's go back to the Mishnah for a second. What did the Mishnah say? Shmoina, Torah, Avada, Hadaya, Mechilas Avain, Mikdash, Yisrael, Koyanim, Yerushalayim. I miscounted again. Okay, Torah, Avada, Hadaya, Mechilas Avain, Mikdash, Yidden, Koyanim, Yerushalayim. It's also 9. So why does the Mishnah say 8 if it's also 9? Oh, I see. Because the last thing, which is all the other blessings, not a blessing, not one of the 8 brachas. He just adds a prayer, not an actual bracha. Perhaps. Right. V'hashar tefillah, and the rest is prayer, not a blessing. So it's those 8 blessings. On the Torah, for the service, thank you, forgiveness, temple, Israel as in the people of Israel, Koyanim, and Jerusalem. And then the rest is prayer, but not a 9th bracha. That's the point. So the Gemara now is going to tell us what that prayer is at the end. Okay. So the Mishnah said Bashar Tefillah, and the rest is prayer, in which is, actually Rashi says it is a blessing, but it's not part of the 8. It's like an additional one, which is prayer, as opposed to the other ones, which are just blessings. I'm not sure exactly why this is differentiated as a separate thing from the other 8. I'm not 100% sure on that. Anyway, Tana Rabbanon, the Mishnaic H text, Brisa, which elaborates on this description that after the 8 brachas, he has the rest prayer, which is also bracha, as Rashi puts it, which is tefillah, prayer, tchina, supplication, rina, song, bakasha, request, sha'amcha Yisrael, that your people Israel, says the high priest, tzrichin divasheya, they need salvation. And goes on to describe, I suppose, a prayer for the people. And he concludes, Shemea Tefillah, the one who hears prayer. So we have Shemea Tefillah, then Moedim. And actually, the high priest, when he's holding the Torah, does it in the reverse. Amongst other things, he first says Ritzei for the service, then Moedim to thank you, and then says Shemea Tefillah at the end, which is what we did before. Following?
This is his prayers, blessings he says.
The blessings he says, 8 blessings, and then a prayer. The 9th blessing is a prayer. And the other 8 are also prayers. I'm not really sure why the differentiation, why this last one is not part of the list. Why does the Mishnah say 8 and then a prayer? Just say 9, the last one being prayer. I'm not sure exactly. Anyway, this is what it is. So he does simplify it in conclusion. He makes 8 blessings and then a prayer at the end, which is also a blessing. Right? The 8 blessings are blessing over the service, blessing of thanks, which is Ritzei and Moedim that we say in our Shemona Esrei every day, a blessing of forgiveness, which we say in Yom Kippur, a blessing for the temple, we don't say that, a blessing for Kohanim, we don't say that, a blessing for Israel, we don't say that, a blessing for Jerusalem, we don't say that.
Maybe it's 8 plus 1, because he wants to differentiate.
Yeah, but why?
Torah wants to differentiate the final blessing.
Oh, I forgot that before all this he makes a bracha on the Torah. Sorry?
Suggesting maybe that it's 8+1, meaning like the last.
Right, we're differentiating the
It's a
blood.
blessing, but it's not grouped.
It's not
a
grouped.
bit
Yeah, that's,
different from the other blessings.
yeah, that's why I'm asking why.
It's overarching.
It's over, perhaps it's overarching.
Rather than specific to one.
So I guess so the 8 are specific to certain items,
Yeah.
whereas the 9, this last one, is not part of the group because it's an overarching prayer. Your people need salvation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he concludes with Shemei Tefillah, the one where is prayer, which is what we also conclude with before it's we say Shemei Tefillah. Okay, now here's a beautiful thing. I mentioned this yesterday. The involvement of the community in this whole process. At this point forward, every single person, maybe Sefer Torah brings his own Torah from his own house. It's a mitzvah. Everybody has to have a Torah. Most of us fulfill this obligation either by having a letter in the Torah, or as the Rosh writes it, by having Sfarim. So let's say we follow the Rosh's view that we fulfill the mitzvah of owning a Torah by having books in our house. This is the Rosh's view that we fulfill the mitzvah of writing it. The Torah says, right, everybody should write a Torah. And the king would have a second one, right? But everybody has to write their own Torah. I don't know how many people have done that. So one way of doing it is by commissioning a scribe to write a letter on your own. And there's another way of explaining it. The Rabbi has a whole explanation how every communal Torah is written on behalf of the whole community. So you own a portion of it. Lev Bezdin, a long explanation. Another way of explaining it is the Rosh's famous explanation that when you own your books at home, that's fulfilling that mitzvah. Because the Torah says, write this book so you can read from it. Okay, so the modern version of reading from it is having books in your house. Okay, so imagine that's the version. So everybody's coming to the temple with their own svarim, their own chumash in their house, or actual Torah, and starts to read from it. So Gemara asks for kol kach lama. Why? Why is everybody doing that? Answers the Gemara, kedei lahares chazusei l'rabim, so that everybody can show off the beauty of their svarim. And it adds glory to Hashem when the whole community is packed in the temple and everybody's got their svarim. Look what I have, look what I have, look at this print, look at this writing. Back in the old days, they didn't have printed svarim, they had actual scrolls. Even if it wasn't the kosher Torah scroll, they came with scrolls. So imagine that. Hundreds of thousands of Jews, everybody coming with their scroll and everybody sharing with each other. Look at my writing, look at your writing. How beautiful is that? So that concludes the Gemara's description of the Yom Kippur reading of the high priest. And we got to this, you'll remember, because we began way back. We're still learning the laws of Sotah, right? We've gone way back. But the Sotah, part of the Sotah proceeding is where the Kohen has to administer an oath. We went on to discussion whether that oath has to be done in the actual Hebrew, which it does, or could it be done in any language. And from there, the Mishnah went on to discuss different mitzvahs, some that are to be delivered in the original Hebrew, and some that can be done in any language. Amongst the things that can be done, that have to be done specifically in Hebrew, is the Birchas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. And from there, we went on to another set of blessings from the Kohanim, which is the high priest on Yom Kippur.
Like
Tangent. And the next thing we're going to do is discuss another mitzvah in which the reader has to do so in the original Hebrew, and that is when the king reads from the Torah at the mitzvah of Hakel, which, as I mentioned, by divine providence, this year is a year of Hakel, and Hakel would happen this year on Sukkot, and actually, with Hashem's help, it will happen. Just Mashiach could and should come before Sukkot, so we can fulfill that mitzvah of Hakel. And by divine providence, just as we approach Sukkot, we're going to learn the Mishnah discussing the proceeding of what the king does at the mitzvah of Hakel. So that we'll get to on Monday. Monday, Erev Yom Kippur?
Tuesday.
Yom Kippur is Tuesday night, right?
Tuesday night.
Yeah, so we'll have a class Monday. So we'll start the description of the Hakel on Monday, and we'll continue that after Yom Kippur as we lead into Sukkot. Have a wonderful day, Eden.
Great, thank you so
All the very best to you. Shabbos, Rabbi. God bless you.
Shabbos and have a good day.
All the very best to you all.
Good day, Judge. Thank you.